Welcome back to the party, everybody. I'm your host, Fletch, aka the Indian Jesus, here to resurrect the second coming of common sense. How's everybody doing tonight? Quick shout out to the replay gang. Thank you so much for coming back to watch this, even though you missed the best part, the live show. Don't worry, you will still very much enjoy this, but make sure you are here every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern, and sometimes whenever I feel like it. Yesterday, I did a live just randomly, so make sure you hit the subscribe button. You will never, ever, ever miss a party ever again. Really quickly, a big thank you to the sponsor of the stream, mysickshirt.com. Whatever your persuasion, they've got something for you. And of course, it is the only place to get your very own The Indian Jesus official merch. Only at mysickshirt.com. All right, let's party. We got 2B in the building already. Welcome. So we have an interesting
I don't think you believe.
We got an interesting show for you guys today. We've been talking a lot in the Discord panels about religion, and it's been a while since we've done a religious themed show. So I figured we would dive back into it. So, hey, we got Alex Pickus in the building. What is good? Welcome. So yeah, I figured we would check out this conversation. It's actually a brand new podcast, the Within Reason podcast. It's an offshoot of Cosmic Skeptic, aka Alex O'Connor, somebody that I've been following for a long time. Just, being somebody who was really, good at showing me the type of things that would, when I lost my religion, what kind of things that I could use to build that hierarchy of values that allows me to not be a heathen. And maybe some people think I am, but let's dive in. As always, if you cannot hear the video, please do let me know.
Believe that. Whenever I talk to people or dialogue with people who are defending that position, I don't honestly think you believe that.
God is the great ground of all being, but there's this idea that if you don't accept this, or if you put a foot wrong, or if you do the wrong thing, you get punished, and in such a way that even if you do it inside your own head, you have this force that can punish you for it. Doesn't that seem tyrannical to you?
Yeah, that does, but that's not the right way to look at it.
There was an episode of Family Guy where they bust into the compound and they find Osama bin Laden, and he says, "I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior," and then yes, he's in heaven.
Right. The most important question to ask about any person is, what does that person worship? Once you know that, you'll know the rest of that person's life pretty well.
Oh my goodness. Before we even start, Dan Jensen in the building. And he heard you. Let's get this out of the way. That's right. Every super chat gets more to hear a treat, and he loves them. Thank you, Dan. Very much appreciated. Welcome to the party. The men are here already.
Welcome to Within Reason. My name is Alex O'Connor, and I'm excited to share with you this new project that I've been working on for quite some time now. Within Reason is a new weekly podcast that's going to go on this channel, dedicated to having long-form conversations with interesting guests. Now, you might say, Alex, you already have a podcast, the Cosmic Skeptic podcast. Platform of G, this is with you. Ministerial organization Word on Fire, and one of the most recognizable faces in the discussions around theism and
that's Ben Shapiro's studio, if you didn't notice.
Specifically Catholicism. I debated Bishop Barron a number of years ago on the existence of God, something that was positively received, and we thought it would be a good idea to sit down again, this time to talk about meaning. And so in this episode, you can expect to hear us talk about whether we find ourselves in a crisis of meaning, and if...
Hey, we got Dr. Evil Genius in the building. Welcome. A great friend of the channel from TSP. Just drop the link to their channel in the chat. Please definitely go check them out. What's going on, brother?
So why that might be the case. Whether the search for meaning can be reducible to evolutionary drives to survive, the conditions for salvation, are people like Jeffrey Dahmer in heaven, and also a conversation about whether God can be described as a celestial dictator. And this episode of Within Reason is brought to you by Blinkist.
All right.
2023.
All right. There's a chapter here. All right. And there we
Bishop Barron,
There we
thank you
go.
so much for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure.
It's been a while since we last spoke. We
Yeah.
had a debate, I think, a couple of years ago on Justin Brierley's show.
Right.
And it seemed to be received quite well. I'm not sure what it was about that particular debate, but watching it back, I think that we have a slightly different approach to the question of philosophy and religion. I noticed that when you speak, you speak quite poetically and almost.
So this is obviously Alex Connor, the atheist, and the other guy is Bishop Barron, the obviously religious guy.
Motivationally about faith. I tried to be quite sort of cold and analytical in that discussion, but I'm hoping that today we'll be able to talk a little bit more on your terms and not have a debate, but a conversation this time.
Okay, so that's where we're starting off. We've got the atheist and we got the Christian, but we're not looking to debate. We're just looking to have a conversation.
And I wanted to begin by asking you about something I've noticed, especially on the online space and amongst young people, which is an increase in the popularity of so-called
come on, struggle stream
self-help movement. There'll be all kinds of YouTubers and books that are sold, but also in the intellectual space, people like Jordan Peterson. A lot of their popularity is driven by the sense of meaning that they're seen to reinvigorate people's lives with.
And then, of course, don't forget about the entire red pill movement that, was really good for a while and then kind of wavered and is not doing so hot right now.
Yeah.
And I think the most astonishing thing about this is the demand for that kind of material. It says to me that we might be living through something like a crisis of meaning. And I wondered if you shared that opinion, and if so, what you think is causing it.
Yeah, I do share that opinion. We're in such a culture of self-invention. The priority is given to the ego to kind of invent its own values and even to invent itself. And the roots of that go back, go to Nietzsche, come up through Sartre and into Foucault and people like that, which has now become the default.
So this guy's rattling off philosophers' names like it's nothing. So he's talking about Nietzsche and Sartre and all these people. So, all right, if we get into some heavy stuff, then hopefully I'll be able to break it down. But this guy, all right, we're in for a good discussion here.
Position of most young people in the West, I would say that we invent ourselves, we invent our own values. And I think if you want to mention someone like Peterson, he's appealing to, I'd call them objective values. And a meaningful life is one that's lived in some kind of purposive relationship to a value, I would say. That when you discover, you intuit a value, whether that's epistemic or aesthetic or moral, and then you order your life according to that value, you're living meaningfully. To me, it's an illusion to think you can invent your own purpose. You can invent your own meaning. I think you discover them. And those are the best moments in life, and they're recorded in some of the great literature of the world, those moments when an aesthetic value appears.
So that's a really interesting point about how you're not necessarily going to be able to invent your own values, but that you can discover these values that exist. And you guys know me as the atheist, the values not only don't need to be within the confines of religion, but are better off not being in the confines of religion. But it is important to have those values and to be looking to refine those values.
A moral value makes a demand on us, or an epistemic value appears, and we say, yeah, that's the truth, and I need to give myself to it.
Yeah, a moral value demands something of us. If we're to say it is wrong to not stop somebody who is, hurting a small child, that makes a demand of you. That's the heart of morality, is what ought you do? What should you do and what shouldn't you do?
I think that's what makes life meaningful. And the crisis is that there's a great doubt about the validity and objectivity of those values. Subjectivity can be very attractive, like, oh, I make it up as I go along, but it's in the end not attractive. In the end, it's spiritually debilitating.
Yep.
And I do think that's why people like Peterson and others are so appealing, especially to young men, because they're appealing in a kind of tough spiritual director way, a tough guru way, to those objective values.
I think you guys are going to be very surprised with how much I actually agree with this guy. The fact of the matter is, you guys, those of you who watch me a lot, know that my moral framework is not very different than your average Christian person's moral framework. It has a lot to do with the words I use and the fervor with which I follow certain beliefs that are held, and how much other people follow the beliefs that they hold. But I think this is going to be at least, at least insightful to see that, you can be an atheist and not be the stereotypical, person yelling that, oh God, just your sky daddy. Da, 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 da. There's more to it than that.
You said that the idea of inventing your own meaning, inventing your own purpose, is a vacuous one. I think I tend to agree with you, but I wonder if you'd be able to spell out for our audience why you think that's the case. It's one of the most common views that we hear in response to people throwing off religion. If you become an atheist, one of the problems you run into is, true or not, the claim is made that without some kind of religious grounding, you can't have any objective meaning. And rather than saying, yes, we can, a lot of people decide to say, well, we don't need objective meaning. We make it up for ourselves.
Exactly. That's where they go wrong. We'll go back there, but really quick, we got Divining Rod in the building. What is good? What is good? Not only him, but Mr. Zig as well. Welcome, guys. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Very glad you guys are here. We're checking out this religious conversation, not a debate, just a conversation between an atheist and a bishop. And we're just getting started. So welcome, welcome, welcome. So I want you to hear that last line real quick one more time.
Kind of religious grounding, you can't have any objective meaning. And rather than saying, yes, we can, a lot of people decide to say, well, we don't need objective meaning. We make it up for ourselves. What's the problem with that?
And I'll give my own answer to that, is that a lot of times, like the bishop said, you're not going to be able to invent your own morality. But that doesn't mean you can't discover your own moral values, that which you follow. And for an atheist like myself, an atheist like Alex here, we do understand that there is a need for something, even if it's not religion. What he's asking is for those who don't feel like there needs to be something to replace that hierarchy. Why is that a problem?
Well, first of all, I would say this, that an atheist can certainly be deeply in touch with objective value.
Facts. There you go.
Epistemic, moral, and aesthetic. And that's what would give that person's life meaning. So I don't hold to the view that ipso facto an atheist has a meaningless life, because I think they can intuit meaning all over the place.
You find out once I end it. Just pick your best approximation of what you think it's supposed to mean, and then we'll talk about it.
Now, if you really press it philosophically, I would argue that those objective values are ordered hierarchically, and they point finally to a ground or source of their meaning. So that's, from Plato on, we have all kinds of people in the great tradition that would argue just that way. So I think the more you live in the world of objective value, it will lead you toward the source of that value, namely God. So I think that's true.
See, and that's the only place. I was just nodding along and saying everything that I agreeing with everything that the bishop was saying. But then he says, you call that value God. Well, that's the only part that we disagree about, bro. That's the only part.
True. But I wouldn't contest the view that an atheist can live a meaningful life. They can intuit all these different values. The trouble with self-invention, to me, is it's living in this sort of clean, well-lighted space of my own little subjectivity. And I don't allow the objective to break through into me and to broaden my life. It's like your countryman Chesterton's thing about, you need to crack some holes in the skull to let in the light. The problem is a sort of self-absorption, or it's a Augustine called it being curvatus in se. I'm caved in around myself. And that's what happens, I would argue, when you walk into the Sainte-Chapelle or you see a Cézanne painting or you grasp the truth of a mathematical formula.
This is the concept of awe, A-W-E, awe, that is so closely tied with spirituality and religious experiences. That's why my first podcast was called the Awe Really podcast. And, playing on the awe, really? And the idea of awe is that feeling, that sensation of experiencing that is so often relegated to religious situations, whether you're praying in a group or singing in a group, or you're in some cathedral that's beautiful, and you get this feeling of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. Again, just like the morality of it all, that is not only available in church. That is not only available through faith in religion. And these things that he's talking about, I think he understands that people who don't have religion can find them. But I don't know that a lot of people who don't have religion understand that that feeling of awe is available to them unless they walk into a church.
Or you look up into the heavens, or it's Kant, the starry sky above and the moral law within, that when you intuit these great values, it's like it's an epiphany. It's a showing, it's a breakthrough. And that's what gives life meaning. When you say, well, I'm going to invent it for myself, to me, it's very tiresome and vacuous and small. It's a small space.
And the irony being, of course, that you're saying that it's so small, and you're talking about a book that has the universe built in 7 days and all this stuff, and you have all the answers there set, ready to go. Whereas the atheist has the mindset that we can use anything to find the path for our life. So I had the poll as, does life have a set purpose? And the reason I put it that way, the reason I said it that way was I wanted you guys to think of life having a predetermined purpose. And so 75% of you said yes. And that's very interesting. And I want you to keep that in mind as we go through. We'll ask again later. And does, number one, did you think of the question in that way? And if you didn't, do you actually think that life has a predetermined purpose? And if not, then I want you to think about how, atheist or not, how do people come to realize what the meaning of their life is? So how do people come to understand what the meaning of their life is? Just sit on that, and we'll come back to it.
Augustine talked about the pusilla anima, the little soul. And the little soul, I think, is born of that self-invention prejudice. The great soul, the magna anima, is when objective value breaks in, and then I can move into a higher space.
Do you think the people who say, well, I'm just going to invent my own meaning and purpose, are essentially just coping with the fact that they're beginning to recognize that their worldview doesn't have any grounding for objective meaning?
Yeah, my guess is that when they say that, they don't really mean it. They are, in fact, in touch with objective value. But they're so enamored of the value of freedom, which, by the way, is a value. I mean, personal freedom is a great moral value. But if you valorize that to the nth degree, then you get into this problem. I think people that say I'm inventing my values, in fact, very often are intuiting objective value if you press them on it.
That's exactly right. People who are just saying they're inventing, I'm just doing what I think is right, are basing it on something. Now, again, the irony is, so are people who are saying they're following the Bible because they're just following the parts of the Bible that they like. But he's right. You don't just start out of nowhere and have these understandings. They're based on something. And these ideas of morality, they've been talked about forever. So it's not anything new. It's just a matter, even if it's something, not something that you are reading in a book, it still exists.
Because we can't finally stay in that Sartrean space. Go right back to existentialism as a humanism. When he said existence precedes essence. I think that's now the default position of most people today in the West.
Exactly.
But to me, that's just it's a going nowhere position, that my freedom invents who I am.
Yeah, so I'm gonna speed that. They get into some more, like heavier terms and stuff. So I want to keep it slow, but they're boring.
No, my freedom finds itself in relationship to great values.
There we go.
That call it and condition it and summon it to something higher. That's when you're truly free.
Yeah, I mean, I've previously compared it to the, well, I think it's helpful to try and understand what meaning means, right?
Yeah.
The term is often used interchangeably with something like purpose. And I think what we're talking about is something like a non-derivative reason to act or reason to be. This is what purpose is.
Yeah.
So now we're talking about purpose and it being different than meaning. A non-derivative reason to act or a reason to be is purpose. Now, they've been talking about meaning this whole time. So how are those different?
And so the idea of having a reason to act, if you invent your own purpose, what it seems like you're doing is inventing some kind of task to fulfill or some kind of motivation to do something for its own sake.
Yeah.
It's like you don't actually have a real motivation to do something, and that's why you do it. But the lack of any motivation causes you to create a task just for the sake of having a task to fulfill, which seems a little circular, I suppose.
Right.
And
also kind of seems like people who are inventing reasons to be upset and then get upset at those things that they have invented. You have the entire wokeness brigade mad about things that they've created. This stuff it's everywhere.
We'd also be committed to the view, for instance, that if one person decides to invent their value by counting the blades of grass in their garden every day until they die, and another person decides to find their meaning and invent their purpose by raising money for Oxfam and lifting thousands of people out of poverty, that both of those people's lives are as meaningful as each other.
Yeah, and,
and that just seems wrong.
Yes, and that's the Sartrean problem. And Sartre himself knew it. If you say the authentic life on his terms is the one in which, my freedom has authentically chosen its own value. Well, Sartre chose to be part of the resistance, but then how do you say the Nazi isn't authentic? The Nazi has chosen his value based upon his freedom. So how do you adjudicate those two things? And see, I would say you have to rely not on your self-inventing freedom, but on some objective value. And I would be able to say, I think, the Nazi is radically out of step with proper moral value, and the member of the resistance was in touch with it. You can't simply appeal to the primacy of freedom and subjectivity, because then you get into precisely that dilemma. But what I find, Alex, interesting here is it's one of Aquinas's implicit arguments for God's existence. So the famous one's based on cosmology, but there's one based upon final causality. So here you are right now, and you're out of your room or your studio, and you're doing the show. So the first question, well, why? Why are you doing it? And you give an answer of some kind, like, well, because this is my livelihood. Well, why is that your livelihood? Well, because I want to make money. Well, why do you want to make money? Well, for this end or that end. Well, why do you think those ends are important? That with any concrete moral act, the two of us are committing a moral act right now, right? We've chosen to do something we both think is good. Well, how come? Keep asking the why question over and over and over again. You'll come finally to some uncaused cause of the will, some summum bonum. Now,
well, this is where you're going to get into survival. At the end of the day, we're all doing what we have to do to survive, and the context in which you use survival is going to be dependent on the level of comfort and luxury. If you're, naked on a deserted island, then survival is, finding a big leaf to cover you from the rain. But survival for most of us means, being able to pay your phone bill and your car insurance. Exactly. Yeah. The Nazi violates the non-aggression principle. That's a value that we should all hold. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to survival.
I'd call that God for all sorts of reasons we can get into.
Of course you do.
But let's say it's money, success, it's fame, it's power, it's whatever. But willy-nilly, everyone's got a summum bonum. That's why the Bible would say the choice is not between theism and atheism. It's always between right worship and false worship.
So it's not between theism and atheism, but right worship and false worship. Again, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that a lot of people who call themselves atheists very much indulge in religious behavior, dogmatic behavior, certainly, when it comes to the government, when it comes to the media, when it comes to, whatever beliefs they do have. They don't have to be religious in order to be dogmatic. So that's an interesting point, that we all have beliefs. We all believe things that we can't possibly prove. And it's about right worship or false worship. Interesting.
It's what do you consider your summum bonum? Is it the true
summum bonum,
or is it some false summum bonum? But everyone's got one, right? You wouldn't. Teilhard de Chardin said that you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning unless you were motivated by some finally unmoved mover of your will. And see, I think that's really worth thinking about. What is it that's motivating even the simplest moral act, like the two of us sitting down and having this conversation?
You said it's not between theism and atheism, but essentially choosing what it is you worship, or choosing what it is that you follow.
True worship or false worship. Right.
Because there has to be something, right? There has to be something motivating action. If there wasn't some fundamental purpose or reason that underlies every other reason you have to act, then those reasons wouldn't exist. They don't have any power of their own accord. If you're motivated to go to work so that you can make money, without the reason for making money, which might be to have a comfortable life, the reason of I want to make money doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't exist just on its own accord. It relies on something more fundamental, and this entire chain must lead back to a first cause. It's interesting. It's quite like
survival
arguments for the existence of God in terms of cosmology or something, but it's about meaning.
Right. It's final causality, not efficient causality, and that's why it's hidden in Aquinas. It's not upfront, like here are my 5 ways, but it's a hidden way. But it's actually closer in spirit to Aristotle himself, who thought the final cause was the most important. And so
I mean, Divine Rod said, who gets to call one thing false or true? I mean, he who has done the research, he who has the evidence, he who has the claim to that claim. If you have evidence that something is false and somebody else doesn't have evidence that it's false or something that's true, then that's who gets to determine that.
If you pursue final causality all the way, you come to some version of summum bonum, or what Paul Tillich, the religious philosopher, talked about ultimate concern. Right? Everyone has an ultimate concern. You do. Everyone does. If you didn't, you wouldn't act in any way. And Tillich always said, and I follow this in my own pastoral life, the most important question to ask about any person is, what does that person worship? Once you know that, you'll know the rest of that person's life pretty well.
So what do you guys worship? Whether it's religious or not, put it in the chat. What do you guys worship? Everybody worships something. You know a lot about the rest of that person's life. So I want to learn more about you guys. What do you worship?
It'll fall into coherence. What's your ultimate concern? And he defined religion famously as ultimate concern. So in that way, then you've got either true religion, that's Augustine, vera religio, or you just got regular religio. You've got some form of false religion or false worship.
Notice how we have yet another definition of religion that I'm sure none of you would have said, whatever he said. Divine Rod said, we're speaking of worship, true worship or false worship, not actual facts. Correct. Yeah. It's not about, so like, let's say that I worship let's say I worship the YouTube gods, and I will do whatever I have to do to make it on YouTube. And so I will, I will use clickbaiting titles, and I will, do the craziest stuff on air, and stuff that's going to be crazy, embarrassing to me. It's not about there's no fact there that's true or false. It's my decision to worship the clicks, the views, the clout, the whatever, that I'm willing to debase myself and do whatever it is that I'm not willing to do right now. Or you could definitely worship Taco Tuesday. To be says altruism. Isn't that nice? Altruism. Okay, fair enough.
Now, what do you make of people who say that on an atheistic picture of the universe, what we essentially are as human beings are highly evolved mammals that have slowly developed this accidental consciousness to help us to survive, and so
which is a fact, guys. Evolution is a fact.
The ultimate motivating factor behind all of our behaviors, even if it's subconscious, would be something just as simple as the drive to survive, the drive to reproduce. Because, of course, somebody's not likely to say this. Some people might reference their children, but on the cognitive level, we might reference having some belief in a set of ideals. But we might say that this is essentially a way that the brain tricks itself into being more likely to survive, because by having these invented ideals, it's more likely to do the work that's going to lead us to survive. And so maybe that's the fundamental value. And I wouldn't say that.
That's what I said. Hey, we got indie film in the building. Welcome to the party. So glad to see you. Says you cannot prove a negative, only a positive. And good Monday evening to y'all. To you as well, sir. Welcome to the party. Glad you are here. We are diving deep into religion once again.
wouldn't characterize it as people worshipping their survival. It would be that this is the motivating factor, and what they're actually worshipping is some invented ideal that just helps us to prolong their survival.
So now we're getting away from this idea that it has to be worship. That even if all of these things boil down back to survival, and you're not worshiping your survival, you're just trying to achieve that survival. And then whatever else is in between, survival and what, up to the reason of why I'm doing this YouTube show or whatever it is. Maybe it doesn't have to do with worship. Now we're getting somewhere.
I've never found that convincing. To me, that's just hopelessly reductionistic. I mean, take
Why?
Hamlet and say somehow I can reduce that to the survival instinct, or I can read Plato's Republic and say, well, that's finally all about the survival instinct or the Divine Comedy. To me, it's hopelessly reductionistic. Is something like bodily survival, basic instincts, ingredient probably in everything we do? Yes, I would say, because we have bodies, and the bodies have evolved from lower forms, and they have all of those instincts and impulses. I wouldn't deny that for a minute. I'm not a Platonist in that way, but I do think there's something that transcends the merely animal dimension of our life, and it's revealed in things like Hamlet and things like our ultimate concern and our quest, not just for a particular beautiful thing, but for the source of beauty. And that's that very interesting moment. It's James Joyce in A Portrait of the Artist, when he's that famous scene looking out at the woman who would eventually be his wife, and he describes her in this rapturous way. And when she turns to look at him, and then he says, "Oh, heavenly God." And that's the move from Plato through Dante up to James Joyce and many others, that through the particular beautiful thing, I'm triggered into an awareness of the source of beauty, the beauty that I'm seeking implicitly in every particular beautiful thing. Or,
you can always tell when you're speaking to a religious speaker, somebody who speaks in religious context all the time. They're so wordy all of the time. Like, bro, just spit it out.
When you grasp a mathematical relationship and it's so powerful to you, and the truth of it is not just the evanescent truth of, well, that thing is in front of me right now. It's you've grasped something that's true in any possible world, that's true at any place or time. That triggers an awareness of the source of truth. So that's how I think it works in a religious consciousness. But I go back to Plato with that intuition.
It's interesting how you characterize the position as being reductionist. I share your intuition that something like Hamlet, the idea that the production of it could be reduced to apes trying to survive, seems incredible. But the two things I would say in response to that is, firstly, this is true of all evolutionary biology, and that I might talk about some minute facet of my body, like my eyelashes or something. And the idea that the development of these particular hairs on the end of an eyelid somehow serve in the great...
Hey, we got Seabass in the building. We were just talking about you. We are so glad to see you. Oh, we are so glad to see you. We are talking about religion, and this is the atheist here. We have a bishop on the panel, so we'll be looking forward to what you have to say.
Survival of species on planet Earth. It seems so absurd and disconnected, but actually, if you draw a long enough chain of reasoning as to why we ended up here, it can be explained in those terms. And also...
So before he moves on from that point, well, all he was really saying is that both times Alex said something and then it went back to the bishop, that he's like, oh, well, I'm just not kind of convinced of that. And like, well, that kind of simplistic, but that just because something is simple doesn't mean it's wrong. And the idea that all life works in the same way and that we're just in a more advanced version of life, that just because that's not awe-inspiring doesn't mean that it's not true. I'm going to say, I was kicked out of another channel for praising the Lord, so here I am. We will not kick you out. We are glad you are here. You can praise the Lord all you like, brother.
You said a moment ago that all the behaviors that we participate in are motivated in some way, they're moral in some way, and there's some kind of ultimate motivation. And you said that you would call this God or ground it in God, meaning that, if I choose to read a book, or if I choose to get on a plane or go to the shop to buy some food, ultimately I'm being motivated by this religious structure. And in the same way that you say it seems absurd that Hamlet can be reduced to evolutionary biology, I might say, well, it seems absurd that me getting up and going to the shop and telling the guy to keep the change is inflatable to something like a religious structure.
There you
but
go.
I think you would say that, although that seems a little strange upon first hearing, there is a chain there that is ultimately fully explained by religion. In the same way, maybe something like Hamlet and the immense awe that human beings feel upon looking upon their loves or upon understanding the universality of mathematics is rather, depressingly, but perhaps just a very long offshoot of this struggle for survival.
So originally, I was kind of on board with this idea that everything, whether you believe in God or not, that there's an idea or a value that you worship that drives you. But now Alex is making a pretty good argument that, well, is it though? That's his whole argument. That's not his whole argument, but that's basically his argument. That we don't necessarily, it's not about worship, and that you would say, he used the example of going to the supermarket. That to say that that's something religious inherently, because it has the drive that is I keep doing this drive that is driven by that worship. That doesn't really make sense. Not really, going to the supermarket is not really a religious experience in that sense. Barron says, every Christian should have a sword in addition to multiple of those. Yeah, I can stamp that.
Let's play with it a little bit. I mean, might you trace origins of these ideas back that way? Possibly. But the experience of the idea itself in its full expression, that's where I'm balking to say, well, I'm going to sort of thereby debunk it and say, well, it's really nothing but, fill in the blank, we're bodies. We come up from the earth and we come up from these deeper, animal instincts and all that. I don't deny that. But okay. I don't think you believe for a second that when you're entered.
Oh, this is just like Henry. I don't think you believe the thing you just told me you believe. I was on board with him. All right, what doesn't he believe?
Attaining some pretty high level mathematics, even though the ultimate.
Look at the smirk. Look at the smirk. Because how many times, as an atheist, 1,000,000 times a day, obviously being facetious, but 1,000,000 times we've been told, oh, you don't actually believe that. Oh, you don't actually think that. That's the smirk of hearing the same thing you've heard 1,000,000 times.
Origin, we could trace even biologically backward, but in itself it's reducible to a mere concern for survival. That something's opened up there that transcends that dimension, and that, again, that's Plato escaping from the cave. That you've moved to a higher level of consciousness. I just balk at the reductionism because I think it mocks the truth of that experience.
So again, the entirety of the bishop's argument so far, and again, I was with him. I was with him on this idea that everybody worships something. But now with this simple example, one example, that's all you need. When you say something like all or always or everything, then all you need is one example. So he said everything we do is based on worship of a value, whether that and he said he calls that value God. Other people may not. But then Alex said, just use one example. Well, I don't think you would say that going to the supermarket is a religious experience, even though it is based on a drive. And all drives are based on values. And all he's been able to say is, well, that seems too simple. Okay, but just like we said before, just because something is simple doesn't mean it's wrong. That's the same argument as looking at a file and be, oh, wow, it's so amazing. It couldn't have popped into existence. It had to have been God. That's called the God of the Gaps argument. Seabass says the problem with world religions is recognition. Islam doesn't recognize Jews, Catholics don't recognize Protestants, and Baptists don't recognize each other at the liquor store. This is Seabass's best comment. I love that one. Hey, we got the Uncle Junior Network in the building. Welcome. What is good? Good to see you. We are diving deep into some religious, not argumentation, just discussion. Welcome to the party.
Bracket religion for a second. Just aesthetic experiences or epistemic experiences or really profound moral experiences. When you see someone like a Maximilian Kolbe, an act of extraordinary saintly heroism in the moral order, and you say, that's
I just dropped the link to Uncle Junior Network's channel in the chat, guys. Please definitely go check him out.
Explicable in evolutionary terms. I mean, I just don't buy it. I think something has opened up that mocks that kind of reductionism.
I mean, it's a strong intuition.
You know what I mean? Maximilian Kolbe, who gave his life in Auschwitz. He was not chosen by the Nazis. They chose 10 people at random to die because someone escaped from the barracks. Kolbe came forward because there was a man that got to his knees and said, I have a wife and children. And so Kolbe came forward and said, I'm a Catholic priest, take me.
Thank you for being here, brother.
And so the Nazis happily took him and then starved him to death. So he's one of the great martyr saints of the 20th century. I would submit to you, it's impossible to explain that on simply like evolutionary grounds or some very.
So this is something that Chester was just saying when I showed him my tattoo about believe nothing except that anything is possible. He was like, well, I'm going to bring that up every time you say that something is impossible. I'm like, good luck, because I don't say that things are impossible exactly for that reason. So what did he just made a claim that that's impossible.
Impossible to explain. So he's one of the great martyr saints of the 20th century. I would submit to you, it's impossible to explain that on simply like evolutionary grounds.
So if Alex can explain it on evolutionary grounds, you're debunked.
Or some variation of the survival instinct. I mean, I think it mocks the moral splendor of that act. And I think there's something that's concomitant in the epistemic and the aesthetic order too.
Seabass says the Shriner's motto is anything is possible. What is a Shriner? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because I got this going for me. I got believe nothing except that anything is possible. So the believe nothing part is obviously bigger, but oh, interesting. Well, they don't go with the believe nothing though. Vine Rod said, when Rona first hit, I started feigning kindness to people. It was quite interesting. Yeah, I think we all did a little bit of feigning in there. Oh my goodness. Oh snap. Uncle Junior Network, thank you so much. The $50 super chat, no question, no comment, just pure love of the game, and as always, a treat for Morty. There we go. Woo! Thank you so much. All right, let me add you to the banner. All right, let's get back into this. Thank you so much, brother. I really do appreciate that. So let me back this up.
I mean, I think it mocks the moral splendor of that act. And I think there's something that's concomitant in the epistemic and the aesthetic order too.
I mean, do you think it's truly impossible? I mean, I understand that it's depressing and potentially insulting, as you suggest there with the term mocking, to reduce such an act of heroism to biological drives.
Thank you again, Uncle Junior.
But I think that people interested in this line of thought are essentially trying to explain a phenomena. They're saying we have this phenomena of these animals that decide to sacrifice themselves for each other. And somebody comes along and says, well, look, I mean, in the evolution of mankind, people share their genes. You know, if somebody is an adult, they might sacrifice themselves easily for their children on an evolutionary ground. It's so easy to see evolutionarily why it would be that a father would sacrifice himself for his children, especially if the father isn't going to have any more kids. On a purely survival of the genes approach, it's the most straightforward thing in the world to see why that would be the case. Mm-hmm. Similarly, you can see why it might happen for a brother or a cousin, and you can expand this to strangers who share some genetics.
You see how you're stretching that's so thin now. I mean, you're beginning with something, as you say, is somewhat incredible, intelligible.
But this is where we start getting the mental gymnastics. That everything that he just said goes perfectly in line with what we've been talking about. But, oh, you're stretching it so thin, but it still works. So what's the problem with that? What's the problem with that? As long as the analogy still fits, then we're not saying anything wrong. If there's something wrong, you can point out where the analogy falls apart.
But now you're stretching it to read someone like Kolbe to understand his act of self-sacrifice that way. I just don't buy it. I mean, I get it. I've read the arguments but I just don't think it honors the integrity of what's happening there. You know,
but this is why I wanted to bring this up in this way, is to say that that first step of saying, well, the father sacrifices himself for his son or his children, let's say, and somebody comes along and says, I think this can be explained in terms of the survival of genes. I don't think it would be appropriate to say, well, you're mocking the sacrifice, or you're diminishing the sacrifice, or you're ruining the moral import of that sacrifice. I think all they're doing is explaining it. And so, you know, be it we may be sort of stretching things a bit more thinly, but the terminology that you used of trying to explain such a sacrifice by reference to the survival of genes being first impossible. You say, I think it's just impossible to describe it in these terms. And second, that it mocks the moral sacrifice. If it doesn't do it in the first case, of the father sacrificing himself for the children, why would it do it in the latter?
Exactly.
Because you've stretched that.
That doesn't answer the question. Why has this analogy fallen apart? If you don't have anything there, then it doesn't matter how far it's stretched. As long as the analogy fits, the analogy fits. Hey, we got Harley in the building, our resident fact checker. What is good, girl? Glad to see you as always. We are here with Bishop Barron and an atheist. Welcome to the party. CUS says, anything is possible. Sounds optimistic until you consider what anything means. Oh, I have considered it, sir. And that is exactly why there's both parts of that. They believe nothing except that anything is possible. And that means that the worst could be possible. Goes on to say, there's some evidence to suggest the Ark of the Covenant is buried below the exact location of where Jesus was crucified. Well, bring that evidence to light and you'll get a Nobel Prize.
String so tight at that point. I mean, I think you've not honored that a quantum has been crossed. There's something new that's emerged within human experience that can't just be reduced to a physical impulse. It's on a spectrum, obviously, because I would say both visible and invisible, both body and soul, and there's elements that we can explain through recourse to.
And then we get the word salad of just, well, no, that's not how it works. This is how it works. How does the analogy not work?
Material causality, but then others, I just think a quantum's been crossed. And I always just sort of laugh. That's why I use the Hamlet example, that it just seems so ludicrous to me to say that that's understandable utterly. I mean, maybe in certain respects or in the beginning of the analysis or something, but that utterly Hamlet's explicable in terms of evolutionary principles strikes me as ludicrous. And the same with high moral acts like the Kolbe Act or, in any of the three basic orders.
Yeah, I mean, I
don't know what the Kolbe Act is. Kolbe Act. What? Huh. I don't know what he's referring to. Religious Freedom Restoration Act? I'm not reading all this. All right. I don't know what's going on here. Harley, if you can figure that out.
can see why you think it would be stretching an explanation thin. But I mean, as you say, you're familiar with. I mean, there's a wealth of literature and a wealth of generally scientists, I think, are of this view. When you hear people talking about reducing morality to evolutionary drives, it's often a scientist rather than a philosopher who's talking about it. But this is a view that's held, and it's a view that's quite popular, certainly among secular scientists and philosophers. I was just surprised to hear you so flatly describe it as impossible.
No, I didn't say impossible. I said the beginnings of the analysis might participate at that level, but I think a quantum is crossed at some point where that becomes ludicrously inadequate as an explanation. So
why?
I don't think you believe that. Whenever,
again, going back to just, well, I don't think you believe the thing that you just told me you believe. Why? All you're doing is sitting there and just saying things. You cannot make claims without backing them up. If the analogy doesn't work, you need to tell me why the analogy doesn't work. If you don't think I believe something I just told you I believe, then you need to tell me why you don't think I believe that. And it better be something that I had something else that I told you that doesn't go in line with me believing the thing you're telling me that I don't believe.
Whenever I talk to people, dialogue with people who are defending that position, I don't honestly think you believe that Hamlet or Maximilian Kolbe or the Sistine ceiling is utterly explicable in terms of evolutionary impulses. I don't think you believe that, because to me, that's such a ludicrous position to hold. And it's animated, let's be honest, by a scientism. It's not animated by like pure objective science. It's by the assumption that reality must be reducible to the physical. So
now he's invoking scientism. So we had actually just talked about scientism on this channel, and the idea that, science is a process. Science is not a set thing. Science is not an organization that determines what is true or not. But so many people, particularly atheists, particularly liberals, will use science as their religion. I don't think that's what's happening here. We got a couple comments. Hey, we got Nick in the building. What is good? What is good? Welcome to the party, Nick. Says, hope everyone's doing wonderfully today. Thanks to all for making this a great place to explore ourselves and hopefully keep growing as people. That's great. So are you. What is good? What is good? We got Mike Crane in the building. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, I mean, it's kind of a long thing. So basically, the conversation started out with the bishop here saying that we operate based on worship. Everything is it boils down to worship. Whether you're religious or you're not religious, then it's a value. He calls that value God. So do a lot of people. And I was kind of on board with that. Even as an atheist, I'm like, okay, that makes sense to me. Then Alex, the other guy who is also an atheist, gave the example that something as simple as going to the grocery store for just for food is not something that we would necessarily consider an act of worship, and they agreed. And then he brought up a different example about how a man would give his life for a child, and bringing that to a different Let's just go back because I'm butchering this. Let's just go back a little bit. This thing's not that long.
I mean, I understand that it's depressing and potentially insulting, as you suggest there with the term mocking.
I don't think you believe for a second that when you're entertaining some really high.
This is right where he started talking about that. Let's see if we have any others before we jump back in. All this stuff about that. Very cool, very cool. Oh no, Dan has to leave us. All right, you have a good night, brother. All right. Okay, so let's dive back in.
Level mathematics. Even though the ultimate origin we could trace even biologically backward, that in itself is reducible to a mere concern for survival. That something's opened up there that transcends that dimension. And that, again, that's Plato escaping from the cave, that you've moved to a higher level of consciousness. I just balk at the reductionism because I think it mocks the truth of that experience. So bracket religion for a second, just aesthetic experiences or epistemic experiences or really profound moral experiences. When you see someone like a Maximilian Kolbe, an act of extraordinary saintly heroism in the moral order, and you say, that's explicable in evolutionary terms. I mean, I just don't buy it. I think something has opened up that mocks that kind of reductionism.
So that I don't know if we skipped the exact part of it, but to answer Mike Crane again, he was talking about how we could see that evolution would drive somebody to sacrifice themselves for their own kid. And then he said that to say that is evolution is to balk at the sacrifice.
I mean, it's
explain
a strong intuition.
Kolbe. Maximilian Kolbe, who gave his life in Auschwitz. He was not chosen by the Nazis. They chose 10 people at random to die because someone escaped from the barracks. Kolbe came forward because there was a man that got to his knees and said, "I have a wife and children." And so Kolbe came forward and said, "I'm a Catholic priest. Take me." And so the Nazis happily took him and then starved him to death.
We got the God Talk in the building. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Says there is no purpose in life without God. Well, as an atheist, I will strongly disagree, but glad to have you here, and I hope you are enjoying the conversation.
So he's one of the great martyr saints of the 20th century. I would submit to you, it's impossible to explain that on simply like evolutionary grounds or some variation of the survival instinct. I mean, I think it mocks the moral splendor of that act, and I think there's something that's concomitant in the epistemic and the aesthetic order too.
So again, he's saying that to sacrifice yourself to save your own child is something that is glorious, and to be able to boil that down to an evolutionary thing that, oh, I want my genes to continue, is mocking that sacrifice, which, I mean, I don't think it is. I think it's just explaining what it is.
I mean, do you think it's truly impossible? I mean, I understand that it's depressing and potentially insulting, as you suggest there with the term mocking, to reduce such an act of heroism to biological drives. But I think that people interested in this line of thought are essentially trying to explain a phenomena. They're saying we have this phenomena of these animals that decide to sacrifice themselves for each other, and somebody comes along and says, well, look, I mean, in the evolution of mankind, people share their genes. You know, if somebody is an adult, they might sacrifice themselves easily for their children on an evolutionary ground. It's so easy to see evolutionarily why it would be that a father would sacrifice himself for his children, especially if the father isn't going to have any more kids. On a purely survival of the genes approach, it's the most straightforward thing in the world to see why that would be the case. Similarly, you can see why it might happen for a brother or a cousin, and you can expand this to strangers who share some genetics.
See how you're stretching that so thin now. I mean,
so that was it. That was it. Saying that it's purely evolution that would drive a father to save their child, and that you could expand that. And so until you're saying why you can't expand that, just that, oh, you don't like it, that's not a legitimate argument against the idea that all of this can be driven by survival. So Seabass says, you base your belief on not understanding the origin of the universe? No, I base my life on information that I can verify to a certain level of certainty. Now, obviously, we can't have perfect 100% certainty with anything. So the things that we know pretty well. And the things we don't know, we will hopefully figure them out. Mike Crane said, it's certainly more than just evolution. The universe is always growing. We are part of that universe. I agree with all of that. But the notion that a sacrificing yourself to save your own child, would be something that can't be driven by an evolutionary biology. Again, it's just, why not? That's the argument being made. That's the claim being put forward, but there's no argument being made. Harley says, sacrifice to me isn't from evolution. There are a few species on the planet that sacrifice themselves for others. Majority do the exact opposite. So there's little evidence to suggest it's evolution. So I don't think he's not saying that sacrifice is something that humans are aspiring to and that we would see more of it. We're talking about an individual instance of the fact that it is, like you're saying, against our nature to hurt ourselves, to end our lives, that the survival of our genes could and would drive a parent to sacrifice themselves to save their child. Yeah. So it's not that it's evolutionarily preferable that we sacrifice ourselves. That's not what they're saying. Just that in that individual case. Mike Crane says, I would disagree with that 100%. Certainly that I know that I don't know God. I would disagree that 100% certainly that I know that I don't know God. I don't, can you try this one more time? I don't know what this means. Hey, we got David Banner in the building. What is good? What is good? Says God is real and all you sinners will be the first to go when he returns. Well, I'll let him tell me that. Mr. Zig said maybe it can be easier to also look for the devil. I mean, that's definitely not hard to find. Hey, we got just a cog in the effery. I can't say that. I can't even say your name anymore. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Seabass has a question. Is it possible for evolution to create a spore that eats everything it touches? I have no idea. Maybe. Nick says, just a thought, but if God exists, could the Big Bang have been God's birth? Just trying to think outside the box. Very possibly. Anything is possible, but we would have to have evidence that that would be the case before we accept that that is the case. Mike Crane says, I know that I don't know God. Yeah. So that's the aspect of, having 100% certainty. None of us are going to have 100% certainty. A lot of you that follow religion believe that you know God. And a lot of us who are atheists, who are not religious, know that we don't at least have a relationship with a God, or if there even is a God. But again, that level of certainty can never be 100%. It can never be 100%. So keep your eyes open.
You're beginning with something, as you say, is somewhat credible, intelligible, but now you're stretching it to read someone like Kolbe to understand his act of self-sacrifice that way.
So notice how he keeps referencing this Kolbe person. That's called an appeal to authority. Now, I'm not too familiar with who he's talking about, so I'm hoping Alex does. But the logical fallacy would be an unqualified appeal to authority, or appeal to unqualified authority. We're saying, well, this guy said it, so it must be right. When this guy, who is this guy? 5, 6, 7 times he said this guy's name, and he hasn't given an argument as to why that the argument that sacrificing yourself for your own child, A, it couldn't be driven by evolution and survival, and B, wouldn't be able to stretch to other people. What was it was 2B who said her drive, her highest value is altruism. Well, if there was somebody dying right in front of you and it wasn't your kin, the altruistic thing to do, I mean, if you had to sacrifice yourself to save them, the altruistic thing to do would be to sacrifice yourself. So the argument's just not being made. Dave says Jesus is real too. He was that buff white guy in the middle of the desert, right? You got it. Mike says, I don't believe anything. I know that I don't know. If you look into any mystic, they will say the same thing. A Buddhist master, quote, will say there's nothing to teach because there's nothing to know. I love that. I like that. And that, yeah, I mean, what is there to really know? There's stuff that works in a framework of understanding, but especially if you've ever had the experience of being on psychedelics, you realize that even just not all of that stuff applies when you just change your perspective just a little bit. Just a little bit.
I just don't buy it. I mean, I get it. I've read the arguments but I just don't think it honors the integrity of what's happening there.
Why?
This is why I wanted to bring this up in this way, is to say that that first step of saying, well, the father sacrifices himself for his son or his children, let's say, and somebody comes along and says, I think this can be explained in terms of the survival of genes. I don't think it would be appropriate to say, well, you're mocking the sacrifice, or you're diminishing the sacrifice, or you're ruining the moral import of that sacrifice.
That's the cope. This guy is coping. Well, saying, well, oh, you're mocking that, and instead of giving a reason as to why that is not a good example.
I think all they're doing is explaining it. And so, be it we may be sort of stretching things a bit more thinly, but the terminology that you used of trying to explain such a sacrifice by reference to the survival of genes being, first, impossible. You say, I think it's just impossible to describe it in these terms. And second, that it mocks the moral sacrifice. If it doesn't do it in the first case of the father sacrificing himself for the children, why would it do it in the latter?
Because you've stretched that string so tight at that point. I mean, I think you.
Okay, but is it broken? Is it broken? Then what's your issue?
Not honored that a quantum has been crossed. There's something new that's emerged within human experience that can't just be reduced to a physical impulse. It's on a spectrum, obviously, because I would say both visible and invisible, both body and soul, and there's elements that we can explain through recourse to material causality. But then others, I just think a quantum has been crossed. And I always just sort of laugh. That's why I use the Hamlet example, that it just seems so ludicrous to me to say that that's understandable utterly. I mean, maybe in certain respects or in the beginning of the analysis or something, but that utterly Hamlet's explicable in terms of evolutionary principles strikes me as ludicrous. And the same with high moral acts like the Kolbe Act or...
Oh, so it strikes you as ludicrous. Therefore, it isn't true.
What?
That's not how logic works, sir. Mike says the only way to find out what God actually is through negation. So even this priest is wrong because he's created a God in his own image. Anything man comes up with will be wrong. There you go. Exactly. I am 100% with you. That is something that I am screaming from the rooftops, that this idea that all Christians have the same idea of any of these things, any aspect of the religion, is going to be interpreted differently by each and every person. And so you don't actually have a cohesive religion. You just have your own set of beliefs that you came up with on your own. And the background that you have might be the same as other people. But it's different. It's your own. Cannot know God in detail, but we can know God's plan for the universe. Okay. How? I've been searching. So maybe I've been doing it wrong. How?
In any of the three basic orders.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why you think it would be stretching an explanation thin, but I mean, as you say, you're familiar with. I mean, there's a wealth of literature and a wealth of generally scientists, I think, are of this view. When you hear people talking about reducing morality to evolutionary drives, it's often a scientist rather than a philosopher who's talking about it.
I have, though. So if I've read the Bible and I don't know God's plan, then you're wrong, right? Good argumentation. I love it. Nick says, I cannot disprove God to anyone, but nobody has been able to prove God to me. Not saying there isn't a God, just saying I have seen no evidence that God's existence is truth. Same here. Harley says, I don't think it mocks it, but I think it could undermine someone's sacrifice if we only look at it as people only do it because of an evolutionary drive and not out of love or compassion. Well, but I think what the argument is that love and compassion is there because of the evolutionary drive. That's the whole point. The whole point is that all of this can be properly labeled and explained without denying that it's about love and compassion. But that love and compassion still goes back to something else. That's just explanatory. That doesn't take away from it.
But this is a view that's held, and it's a view that's quite popular, certainly among secular scientists and philosophers. I was just surprised to hear you so flatly describe it as impossible.
No, I didn't say impossible. I said
he definitely said impossible.
The beginnings of the analysis might participate at that level, but I think a quantum is crossed at some point where that becomes ludicrously inadequate as an explanation.
Facts, Mr. Zig. I don't think anybody is qualified to have this conversation about, the meaning of life and all of this stuff without having experienced, some kind of psychedelic experience. I also don't think that if you've never genuinely believed in some type of religious context, you also are missing something that you don't. There's nothing else on earth like believing that God is right there watching you. There's nothing else like that experience. And so in both cases, I think that you really need to have the full picture. And without both of them, you don't get it. Mike says, to continue, that also means atheism is wrong. You're saying there is no God. Oh, thank you again, Mike. I love the opportunity to talk about what these words mean. So I am an agnostic atheist. What does that mean? The word Gnostic has to do with knowledge. The word theism has to do with belief in a god or gods. So what does an agnostic atheist mean? It means I don't know, but I don't have a belief. So I am not saying there's no God. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm saying I have not accepted the claim that there is a God. That is not the same thing. I believe nothing except that anything is possible, and that includes the existence of God. But I just have not been convinced. So that's where, you are, if you believe in God, you are an agnostic theist. You don't know that God exists, but you have faith that God exists. If you're an atheist, you should be an agnostic atheist. Agnosticism is not like some in-between where I believe or I'm on the fence and that's agnosticism, or I'm an atheist and I believe there is no God. They're not mutually exclusive. So agnosticism has to do with what you know, and theism has to do with what you believe. No, atheism is not wrong. It can't be wrong. It's just an acceptance or a lack of acceptance of a claim. So you're saying there's no God, which is a God in your image too. As we point out, we don't know. Yes, if I was saying that, you would be correct. I would be wrong. Check out the Tao Te Ching. Universe is intelligent. Interesting. We'll have to check that out. Just a Cox says, my question is, why does the concept of one God automatically negate everybody else's beliefs? Great question. I don't know why it should. Or I mean, I don't know why it doesn't, because it certainly shouldn't. We got some agreement from Nick, and Seabass says, according to God's word, God is a jealous God. What a little bitch. Like a husband for his wife. Beta! God does not want us to make idols and wants us to come to God for help. Needy little thing, ain't he? Exactly. Just a cog. You got it. You got it. Harley says, love and compassion could come from evolutionary drive. Evolution is still a theory, though, so we can't be completely sure. Okay, but it's a scientific theory. It's not a hypothesis. It's a scientific theory. Do we have to go over the... I'm hoping we know that the way that we use the word theory in normal English is not the same way we use it in science. I'm going to assume you know that.
So I don't think you believe that. Whenever I talk to people, dialogue with people who are defending that position, I don't honestly think you believe that Hamlet or Maximilian Kolbe or the Sistine ceiling is utterly explicable in terms of evolutionary impulses.
Why?
I don't think you believe that.
Why?
Because to me, that's such a ludicrous position.
Why?
And it's animated, let's be honest, by a scientism. It's not animated by like pure objective science. It's by the assumption that reality must be reducible to the physical. So I'm going to make this finally ludicrous claim that these very high spiritual and moral values are purely explicable in terms of their evolutionary foundations. I mean, I think it's motivated by a philosophical prejudice much more than objective science.
I mean, certainly I would hesitate to recommend that people assume that let's say a materialistic explanation ought always be favored. There's this idea, which I think is what you're describing as scientism here, that should there be a materialistic hypothesis, there should be some kind of bias or some kind of automatic leaning towards that explanation over a non-material explanation. I don't think we should do that.
I said shit. Me neither. So he was just talking about scientism, like we were talking about earlier, this dogmatic assumption that if the scientists say it, it must be true. Now, if the scientists say it, it's probably true, but we need to do more science to make sure that they're not wrong. That's how science works. Not just trusting them because they said it. Hey, we got Splits in the building. What is good? What is good? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Mike said the reason this is important is because we don't need a religion if we know that we belong here. Love it, love it, love it. Yeah, boys, what's poppin'? Nick says, good explanation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So many don't understand the difference. So good job explaining it as usual. Yeah, I mean, that's true. A lot of people don't understand that, I would say a lot of people do think that being an agnostic means you're like halfway in between believing and thinking for sure that there's no God. And that's just not what it means. That's just not what it means. They're two different realms. And they're not mutually exclusive. You can be an agnostic theist. You can be a Gnostic theist. You can be a Gnostic atheist. I think if you're Gnostic without the A, then you're a moron. But, you know, that's between you and God, or you and, you know, whatever God doesn't exist. I don't believe in any. I mean, I definitely believe in illusions, but Clarke's third law, I don't remember of what, but Clarke's third law is any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. If we have technology that is advanced enough to convince you that something that's being done cannot be done, it will convince you of magic. Maggots. It will convince you of magic. So make sure you're always leaving up the possibility that there is a scientific or naturalistic or materialistic explanation or everything. Everything? Everything. Religion is a control over the minds of people, for the gain of the empire that controls it. Okay, I don't think I disagree with that. Harlan said, a scientific theory is an explanation of an aspect of the natural world and universe that has been repeatedly tested and corroborated in accordance with the scientific method, using accepted protocols of observation, measurement, and valuation of results. Right. So, you know, normally when we talk about a theory, we'll use the word when we actually mean a hypothesis. So like if we walked in, let's say we're all going to dinner, and we walk in and the hostess is there dead. And we see that there is one cook in the back with a bloody knife. You'd say, "Oh, I have a theory that the cook did it." That's not how it's used in science. That would be a hypothesis. My hypothesis is that the cook killed the hostess. But now, before that becomes a working theory that the cook killed the hostess, we would have to do tests. We'd have to do all this type of testing that would have to be repeated over and over and over. So evolution absolutely is how we got from single cell organisms to where we are today. That doesn't mean we understand how life began, but once life did begin, evolution is absolutely how we got here. So yes, has a question. Currently in China, there are worms falling from the sky. Would worms falling from the sky concern you? And why is that only happening in China? Yes, and I don't know. Jessica Cog, I agree with you here. I believe everyone has a different label for whatever God is. Labels were created to remove the fear of what we can't fully explain. Well said. Well said.
I think that
Let's back this up. Let's see where we left on.
Or some kind of some kind of
So we were talking about scientism and how people will automatically assume that if there is a naturalistic or a scientific answer, then that is to be preferred over something less easily explainable.
Leaning towards that explanation over a non-material explanation. I don't think we should do that.
Nope.
I think that explaining human action in terms of an ultimate sense of spirituality and belief in God is a powerful explanation.
See, here, let's just do this really quickly. No, of course it's not normal. But a very easy explanation could be that there was a tornado in a place where there's a bunch of worms, and then that the air was brought over to China, and then they're falling out of the sky because of the storm. Now, I don't know any details about this. I'm just pulling this out of my ass. To assume that this automatically is some gotcha in the context of the existence of God just shows that you have a confirmation bias. That, well, because you can't explain it, must be God. Must be God. That's not how it works, bro. I'm sorry. Hey, we got Just Talk About It in the building. What is good? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Another awesome YouTuber here. Just dropped her link in the chat. Please definitely go check her out. What is good, Jess? Glad you are here. We are talking some religion.
Material explanation. I don't think we should do that. I think that explaining human action in terms of an ultimate sense of spirituality and belief in God is a powerful explanation. I also do think that explaining human action in terms of an evolutionary drive. So, for example, I've talked in a few podcasts now about this idea of terror management theory, which I don't know if you've come across, but it's the idea that human beings are ultimately motivated by a fear of their own death at the same time as a recognition of its own of the inevitability of their death. And so human beings are unique in the sense that all animals are going to die, but human beings seem unique in having a recognition of that mortality. And so when we ask, why is it that only human beings produce things like Hamlet? It may be because engaging in art like this is a way to escape death in the sense of having something of yourself that outlasts your physical death. Now,
we definitely engage in escapism of all different types. And I mean, that makes as much sense as anything else. Mike says, yeah, that's true. But what people don't realize is that God, whatever that is greater than anything you've come up with. That's the whole trick and secret of the universe. Okay, Mike, as I would with anybody else, I will ask you, how is it that somebody could verify that this is correct? I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you're right. I'm just asking, how is it that you came to know this information? And how can I be in that same position of knowing that this is the case?
Of course, this is a scientific hypothesis about how the brain works. It might be true, it might be false, but it seems at least plausible to me. It doesn't seem ludicrous and totally out of the question to suggest that the reason why people produce works like Hamlet, and indeed the reason why people engage in spiritual affairs like religion, the reason why people produce music, and the reason why if somebody finds out they're about to die, it might motivate them to finish that magnum
Yeah,
opus.
but that's again so reductionistic, because if
That's the only thing he has to say. Well, that's reductionistic, and I just don't like it. That's it. That's my argument. It's just reductionistic, and I don't like it.
all Shakespeare was doing, all he was concerned about was making sure that his reputation endures over the ages.
But that's a mischaracterization of the argument. So to say that Shakespeare was because part of the human condition is that we're aware that we're going to die, and that's something that we have to deal with, on a day-to-day basis, every single moment we're alive. And so, because that is the case, we do things to escape that, and among those things could be the works of Shakespeare or anything else. He's not saying that it was a direct one-to-one. That because of this thought of, I'm going to die, so therefore I'm going to do this. That's not what he's saying. He's just saying as a byproduct of that again, the human condition, as I'll refer to it. This knowing that we're going to die, we do things with our lives. That's all he's saying. So again, Mike said that whatever we came up with is lesser than the actual God, and asked him how he knows. He said, "Don't believe me. You have to look inside yourself and can't give up any gurus, religions, thoughts, or ideas that you might have. Everything is wrong. Trace it back to when you were a baby." Again, that was not the question. Question is, how can I verify that you are telling me correct information?
I mean, maybe somewhere in his consciousness he was thinking about that. But I think what he was motivated by, if you ask me, is the sheer beauty and truth that he intuited and he wanted artistically to express in this sublime manner. I don't think he was in his room thinking, "Oh no, I got to make sure my reputation."
See, exactly. I knew where he was going. That he can't see the hypothetical that as the byproduct of the human condition that we would want to create something beautiful. He's saying that, I guess my reputation, I have to leave a legacy. This is a simple-minded person.
Who cares, finally? If I'm going to die like an animal, go to the ground, I don't care if anyone remembers me. Why would I? So to me, that's so implausible. I think Shakespeare was a genius who, like all geniuses,
implausible, because that's not at all what was proposed.
His intuited values at a very high level and wanted to express that because it was lovely so to do. And I'm just balking at this, finally, to me, very scientific prejudice that says, "Oh, no, that can't be right." I don't think Shakespeare worried that much about his stupid reputation. Do you, honestly?
Well, to be clear, I don't think that I don't think that the alternative that you're providing here is silly or should be thrown out. I'm just presenting an alternative here, and of course, Shakespeare isn't consciously thinking of these things. This is what terror management theory is all about: is that we essentially have a subconscious drive towards doing things which allow us to outlive ourselves. It's why human beings have an obsession with doing things that are larger than themselves, because of the fact that, as you say, if you know you're just an animal and you're just going to die,
who cares?
Life becomes purposeless and nihilistic. But purposelessness and nihilism are very uncomfortable positions to hold, and that's why human beings invent these ways to try to outlive themselves, because of the fact that they recognize that they're going to die one day. And
I don't buy it.
And again, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Okay, well, present something else then. Harley says, "To me, God would have to be greater than anything in existence, because if he wasn't, then how would he have been able to create everything?" Good question. Then again, you have to look inside yourself only. People have gurus. You're looking to agnostic atheism, all of that. It's all man-made and pointless. Stick with me, Mike. You made a claim earlier here. Where is it? You said, what people don't realize, that God, whatever that is greater than anything you've come up with. How do you know that that is true? I want to be aware of that fact with you. Is greater than anything you've come up with. That is the thing that I would like to find. So you say, look in yourself. Look for what in myself? So, I was born Catholic. I was brought up in the Catholic Church. I moved to a Methodist church when I was about 8th grade. I stayed very heavily involved in the church until I went to college. And it wasn't until I found psychology, philosophy, and drugs that, religion went out the window. And I'm still very open to it. As I said, I'm an agnostic atheist, and I am completely asking or completely willing to accept that God exists, that religion is real, that all of that stuff. I would just need the information to verify that. So when you say something like this, all I'm asking is, how did you come to realize that this is the truth? You're looking for me to answer. You are looking to me for the answer by asking me, and I'm saying only you have it. That's the whole trick. How do you know that I have it? You don't know me. You don't know what I've the hours and years that I've spent looking to exactly. Can you imagine if it was really that simple? You're saying this. I promise you. Oh, I thought you said. But that's what I'm saying. You're not giving me an answer. What is the process of looking? What does looking inside yourself mean? Do you want me to? So I have to turn my eyes inside out? Talk to me like I'm dumb, because I've done this for years, and I continue to do this. I'm doing it right now, but yet everyone I talk to tells me some iteration of this, and then can't provide any further information. Sure. Join the Discord. The link is in the description. We got a whole channel just for content recommendations. Again, how do you know this? That's all I'm asking. I'm not asking. I understand that you believe this. I'm asking, how do you know that?
That will be the end of it. I mean,
No,
for example,
I'll tell you what I don't buy, because you're such a smart guy, and you've had that experience
Cope.
of intuiting great value. You know what that's like. What a sublime moment that is. And it's something beyond simply physical survival or beyond physical preoccupations. And appeal to unconscious all you want, but you know what that's like.
Yes, I do too, sir. What does that have to do with your argument?
When you've grasped a truth or something beautiful or splendid or transcendently good, it's more than just the body going on there. You know.
Okay, you've said that many times. Make your argument.
So I'm trying to speak out of, I think, the mainstream of the Western philosophical tradition, and resisting a materialistic reductionism. You know what reminds me of, Alex, very much is Hobbesian political philosophy versus Aristotelian. So Hobbes is one of the masters of this approach of, well, human beings are just motivated by fear of violent death. And so all the things that we invent about the moral purpose of government and what makes a state just, forget it. All states are there is to protect us from each other. That we're animals toward each other. So life is nasty, brutish, and short. And so we need the Leviathan state to come in and organize things. And Hobbes felt he was thereby producing a political science, as opposed to all this airy-fairy political philosophy that came before him. But I'm with Aristotle. I'm against that sort of materialistic reductionism. There's something splendid about politics, I think.
There we go. Mike joining the Discord.
There's something of great moral value about it that Aristotle and Aquinas and all those great figures saw. And Hobbes, I think, was a father in many ways of the position that not that you're defending it yourself personally, but you're presenting it. And I just feel the need to stand athwart that position.
I wonder what you think. Suppose Shakespeare were to find out,
Yeah.
He's writing his latest play, and he finds out secretly that, 2 years after he dies, just after he dies, the entire world is going to be destroyed by some meteorite or something. Every single human being is going to die. Do you think this would have the effect of motivating him to write as much as he can? Or do you think this would have the effect of saying, well, then there's no point? Because to me, I don't know about Shakespeare, but for many people, I think that, if I found out that the world was going to end in a week or just after I die or something, my motivation to produce these podcasts would completely collapse, because I would feel like, there's intuitively no point in doing so. But that says to me that at least part of the motivation for what I'm doing here is that there's something that is going to, outlast me, and I'm not just doing it for its own sake of being intrinsically worthwhile, but because I know that if it were the case that it was all going to come to nothing very, very shortly, I wouldn't be as motivated. That says to me that it does have perhaps more to do with what I'm suggesting and with what you're suggesting.
Well, but it is all going to come to an end. I mean, whether it's tomorrow or next week or in billions of years, it will. I mean, Michelangelo's David will be nothing. Shakespeare's Hamlet will disappear. Nothing will last forever. Of course, I know that. Every artist and every philosopher knows that. In a way, who cares? I think you do it because it's good so to do, and in fact, it links you to a transcendent realm. So I would flip it around, that you discover the transcendent precisely through these breakthroughs. these epiphanies. There's Joyce again, right? His job as a writer was to report epiphanies. He said, beautiful, even though he repudiated the church, which he did, but he was inescapably Catholic, James Joyce, because that's a deeply Catholic instinct. He wanted to be a priest for a time, but he became indeed a priest, but of a literary order, because he now was a minister of epiphanies, and his artistry was meant to display them. And when you do that, I would say authentically, you're in touch with a transcendent value that will transcend the world. That does indeed exist at a higher level than the world. So in a way, who cares how long the world survives or not?
What?
You do it because it's splendid so to do.
This came from, don't you think if somebody was going to know that their life was going to end, do you think it would make them want to do more work or less? Essentially, that was the question. And we got here. How is that a thing? We might end up like that. That is very possible. That is very possible.
That's why Kolbe, gave up his life for someone he barely knew this man, but gave his life to him, for him. I think those are what values are like, and that's where meaning comes from.
I want to shift gears based on something that we were just talking about, which is death and death's inevitability. Is it possible for a Christian who believes that there is life after death to see human death as a tragedy?
Hold on, I missed that. I need that. Sorry.
See human death as a tragedy.
So we were just talking about this in Discord the other day, that you can't possibly have the same value for your life as I do if you think that there is eternal paradise waiting for you. That doesn't mean you don't value life, but the value you have for life is only in relation to what it means to the afterlife. So if I don't believe in an afterlife, then I'm going to have more value in this life. Now, he's bringing it up here in the context of seeing human death as a tragedy. I don't think that it's impossible for you to think that human death is a tragedy just because you believe in the afterlife. But we were just talking about this. Horn says, to me, if I knew the world was going to end soon, or my life, then I would spend the rest of my time doing everything to make my life the fullest before departing, which is exactly what we do anyway. We know that our world is going to end, and this was exactly the point that that Alex was making. CUS says, I do not fear losing my life because I know I have another body waiting for me. So this is just a waiting room to him. To me, this is all I have. This is all I have. Spending my time with you guys, exploring these ideas. This is all I have. So I'm sure, Seabass, you value life greatly, but you cannot possibly value it as much as somebody like I do.
Well, not ultimately. I mean, I think we can see it as a tragedy within the framework of this world, but we hold to a divine comedy. I mean, we hold to an ultimate purpose to the world and to creation. So death, we would tend to intuit as a doorway to a higher type of consciousness, a higher realm of experience. So it depends on how you define tragedy, I suppose. Not in the ultimate sense. I mean, we hold to a sort of comic view of the world.
It seems difficult to be rationally upset at the passing of somebody who lives a good life and you're pretty convinced is going to go to heaven. It seems difficult to, I mean, obviously it makes sense to be upset, but do you think there's an irrationality in being upset over it, in the knowledge that such people aren't really gone and are in a better place where you'll be reunited with them eventually?
Well, no, but there's upset and there's upset. I mean, you could be upset in the immediacy and your psychological pain in losing someone you love. Of course, you're upset. And then there's upset in the ultimate sort of cosmic sense. And I would hope that a believing Christian would avoid that sort of desperate view. But it doesn't mean we're not upset at the immediacy of the loss of someone we love.
Is life after death here the key to meaning, given that we were talking a moment ago about the fact that if we're just animals and everything's going to come to an end, then what's the point? Do you think that without this afterlife, like if somebody was a theist who believed in an objective creator, an objective value, let's say, but it all comes to an end and we take an annihilationist view of everyone just ceases to exist, would that be a meaningless worldview as well?
Not completely or utterly. I think you can still find something like meaning as you intuit values around you. Let's say you're an atheist and you say there is no God, there's no life after death, but indeed I have intuited epistemic and moral and aesthetic value. Fine. I think, and if you have a purposive relationship to those values, then you have a meaningful life. Now, again, there's meaningful and there's meaningful. I'd say that's meaningful, small m. Meaningful, capital M, would be those values speak of a higher They're like an opening of a window to a higher and eternal and permanent value. And it's in purposive relationship to that value that life has ultimate meaning.
Exactly. In relationship to that value, life has meaning. Life doesn't inherently have meaning. It has meaning because it has relation to the afterlife. And so just as I think you can believe in the afterlife and value this life because we don't know what the afterlife will be like. Absolutely. Of course. Of course you can. And I think most people inherently do value life. What I was saying is the degree to which we value. You can, if this is all you have, then you will inherently value all you have more than if there is more than that. We were the analogy I used, which I don't know if it's the best analogy, but I couldn't think of a better one, was just money. If I have $1,000 and that's all I have, well, that's going to be much more valuable to me than it is to you if you're a millionaire. Because maybe you only have $1,000 in your hand, but you got $1 million in the bank, or $1 million in assets waiting at the house. So you still value the $1,000, of course. It's $1,000, but it's not all you have. And so I think that's just something that, I don't know how often religious people think about that. But just think about it. Nick says, I feel like you. I just hope to be the best person I can be and enjoy this life as much as possible. That's all we can do, brother. That is all we can do. Dr. Evil Genius says, I think deep down, most people doubt the existence of an afterlife. That's why people hold on to this life as hard as they do. Agreed. I think most people who think they believe in an afterlife don't actually believe it as much. Like if they were pressed, why wouldn't you just delete yourself? It makes no sense. If you are, we know that life is pain. The human condition, we're just talking about, how all the entirety of existence comes with the pain of knowing that you're going to die, the fear, the anxiety that you're going to die. So why not end it? Why not go to eternity, to eternal paradise? Jessica Cog says, we give it off, utilize it, sense it, tap into it. Did I miss something? So all cultures have some concept of God to explain the nature of the world. The frequencies of life are the one constant across all things. We give it off, utilize it, sense it, tap into it. Humans have a natural relationship with energy. Just different names for what we feel, and different rituals tapping into it. 100%. And again, the idea is that we don't need to slap a label on it and make sure everybody is doing it in exactly the same way. Because even when you do slap a label on it, people still interpret and do things in different ways. So let's get rid of all of that. Just focus on the actual values. What is it that you want people to do? What is it that you want people not to do? How is it that you want people to view the world? How is it that you want people to view each other? Let's focus on that stuff. And whatever you believe outside of that, it's up to you. As long as it doesn't break the values that collectively we agree are good for society, then you can believe whatever you want. So it said, I think that the thought of only having one life as opposed to 5, the fact that we only have one life makes every choice important because there won't be a second chance or a do-over. Exactly. There is no do-over. There is no afterlife in my mind. This is it. This is it. Dr. Blue Genius says, that's why I hate they're in a better place BS. If it was a better place, why aren't we all doing what exactly? Drink the Kool-Aid if it's a better place. Is it though?
And so is this what religion can offer somebody with regards to meaning and fulfillment and purpose that atheism cannot.
Yeah.
So imagine that you're speaking to somebody who agrees with you that an atheistic worldview can't ground objective meaning, and that subjective meaning doesn't cut it. It doesn't have the force that we actually value in meaning. And they agree that what we essentially need in order to ground our objective meaning is belief in some form of God or belief in some kind of ultimate truth.
Even though we've just debunked that.
But they just don't. And they try, but they can't. For such people, what are they to do when they don't disagree that meaning should be grounded in God, but they just can't seem to find God and therefore lead what they believe to be a meaningless life?
So we have now a very important question to somebody like me, because he just described me. I think that it gets squirrely with the words and the semantics of it, but I do think that we need some type of value hierarchy. I don't think that it needs to be a God, but I'd be open to it if it would make sense. And so I spent 20 years of my life being a hardcore believer, and then I spent the next 13 years trying to find God, get closer to God, and in the process, realized that I was fed a bunch of BS. So why is God hiding from me? Now, I'm sure Seabass is going to say I didn't look hard enough, or I didn't do this, or I didn't do that. You can believe whatever you want. I am telling you, straight-faced, right into the camera, I gave my entire soul. I gave my entire soul trying to find God. If you don't believe it, that's fine. But I did that. So what he's asking about are people like me. Sebastian says, when you die, do you actually believe you stop having emotion? Here's the thing. I don't know. I don't make claims about things I don't know. I've never been dead. I've never talked to anybody who's been dead. I've never talked to anybody who's talked to anybody who's been dead. So I don't make claims about what happens or doesn't happen when we die. I say, I don't know. Are you so sure that you won't be conscious when you're in the pit? Nope. I'm not. Harley says, Jews, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, and Muslims all follow the same values and laws. Well, supposedly they're supposed to. Yes, I am. So, I mean, I have ancestors who are Hindu. I'm like that type of Indian. I've never been Hindu. I don't know much about Hindu philosophy. Like I said, I was brought up in the Catholic Church, and then I spent a number of years with the Methodist Church. But never really got in touch with my Indian heritage as much. I just using it for clout. Okay, so then how do I not fail? Like that's all I want is to not fail. Why is God making it so hard for me? Is that what love is? I thought God is love. Nick says, if morality really only comes from God, then why are all the murderers not atheists? Why are there so many religious people that have committed murder? Can anyone explain that? Nope. Word up. Mike's having a good time. You keep faith. I mean, that is not a choice. You cannot choose to have faith in that which you do not believe. Doesn't make sense. You say you keep the faith. Do you have faith in Allah as the one, or Muhammad as the one true Messiah? You can't. You don't believe that. You don't have the choice to believe that. That's not how faith works. So I didn't have a choice here. So it sounds Like God failed me. Yeah, no, it sounds like when I lost my faith, God failed. Dr. Evil Genius said there's a scripture in the Bible that says the dead are conscious of nothing at all. If the Bible is making that claim, I don't see how any Christian can say differently. Well, they're going to say, so, well, I'm sure that's in the Old Testament. And even though this is a super holy book, there's one line in there that says we don't have to follow this part. And we're just going to go with that because it's easier for us. I said, seriously, if you look at all of them and their laws, values, and philosophy, they're the same. They're very, very similar. And it's just frustrating that we can't get on the same page. That because of the fact that they are called different things, despite having laws, values, and philosophies that are very, 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 very similar, holy wars have been a thing forever. But yeah, it's the atheists that are messing up the world, right? To be says it appears the better place is predicated upon how the person lived their life. They don't self-delete because they have a purpose here, and if they don't try to fulfill it, then maybe not so great. How do you know that? Mike said, it's so funny. When we listen to some Alan Watts teach Hindu philosophy, then come back and watch this, you'll laugh like I am. Oh, I'm ready for it. I am ready for it. So, wouldn't this more closely point to the fact that he didn't exist than anything else? Yikes.
It depends on the person and depends on their situation in life. What I mean there is you could argue with someone. See, because to me, the position you're describing is like someone who would say there's a radically contingent world, but there's no ground of contingency. I think that's an incoherent position. So if you hold that, I would try to argue.
So he's basically saying what Seabass is saying is that I did something wrong, and even I didn't pray the right way, or I didn't do whatever the right way, despite genuinely in my heart of heart and my soul of souls trying to get closer to God and believing that he existed, believing that Jesus was my savior, that all of that I messed up.
You out of it. In the same way, to say there are really objective values, but there's no transcendent ground or explanation for them is an incoherent position, I would say. And I use everyone from Plato through, contemporary times to try to show that. But more often than not, you don't argue people into it. You accompany them. I've used Pope Francis's language. You accompany people, and you help them to see how these values do, in fact, open on to a higher ground. Usually, we would say saints who are living in and out of that higher space that best witness to it. And so it's the holiness of people around them that shows them the ground of ultimate meaning and truth.
Oh, so according to that logic, then all atheists who are surrounded by religious people no longer are atheists. Just racking up the bullshit here, bro.
So to some degree, it's arguing, but I think to a large extent, it's showing. It's an accompaniment by a saint. I don't mean just a canonized saint. I mean by a holy person. That means someone who's whole or more integrated. That often opens the window. I'd say too, as a Catholic, that's the point of liturgy. The liturgy has a rational dimension to it. It's filled with words and so on. But a lot of the liturgy is non-rational. It's sense experience. It's smoke and it's colors and it's lights and it's gesture, and it's like a dance, as Thomas Merton said, like a ballet. It's with certain prescribed movements and gestures. Well, I mean, it's all up and down the tradition. People who were moved by the liturgy to suddenly the window opens, the door opens, or use the metaphor, change the metaphor, the floor opens and you go down to a deeper place.
All right, guys, I can't wait for the panel tonight because apparently Mike Crane has got all the answers that nobody else in the world does.
That can happen through the aesthetics of the liturgy. It can happen through the witness of a saint. It can happen through rational argument. So I'd use any and all of those depending on the person.
I want to talk about Christianity in particular because
I love how he's just like, okay, I'm not even gonna address that because you didn't answer the question. And I mean, I guess he answered the question, but it's just the same tired old. Well, if you really believe, you'll find a way. If you really believe, then God will find you. Got the shit.
Because we've spoken about meaning and about theism broadly, but the Christian story has some peculiarities, and I wonder if you could summarize what you think the central message of Christianity is, as opposed to other world religions.
Jesus Christ is risen from the dead.
Did he
And the significance of this is it related to life after death? Is it related to forgiveness? Is it related to God being privy to the human condition?
Yes, all that. I would say another, shorthand, St. Paul used it, Jesus Kyrios, Jesus is Lord, is another way of stating the essence of Christianity. But I'll stay with the first one, the resurrection, which is the euangelion, right? That's the good news, the glad tidings. That God, who journeyed all the way down to the very bottom of the human condition, entering into absolutely everything that terrifies us. You mentioned Jordan Peterson earlier. He had a good little piece on the cross where he said that you look at the cross of Jesus, you see physical suffering at its limit, you see death itself, you see humiliation, you see the abandonment of someone by his friends, you see betrayal, you see institutional injustice. Every little thing that terrifies us about being human is on vivid display on the cross. And Paul says, that's the one thing I'm preaching. I'm going to show you this. And it horrified people in the ancient world. It horrified them, the cross. To see a cross was horrific. But Christians held it up. Now, why? Because in the resurrection, they saw that the love of God, having journeyed all the way into all of that, is more powerful than all of that. It can bear us despite all of that. And therefore, it represents a victory. The church fathers talk about Christus Victor, Christ the victor. Well, over what? Over all of that, over everything that terrifies us. God's love is more powerful. So
how do you know
I'm
that?
certain neither death nor life, nor angels nor principalities, nor height nor depth, nor any other power could separate us from God's love.
How do you know that?
Because we killed God, and God returned to us in forgiving love. Boom. Talk about the door opening up. That's the door that opens up.
Talk about cope. Well, we killed God, but God just came back as love. Love didn't exist before. What are you saying? What are you saying?
Grace, call it. Revelation, call it. But it's the moment when the supreme manifestation of the divine love that went all the way down. I think that's the essence of Christianity. That's when they said good news, that's what they meant.
And this, of course, is the prerequisite for human beings being sinful creatures who've sinned against God, absolving themselves and finding forgiveness. It seems like there's a condition here, though, of course. In the Christian story, God becomes man and is crucified, and through this saves us from our sin, but it's conditional upon something like accepting this gift, something like...
well, sure. I mean, you can lead a horse to water. I mean, if God can open up the window and manifest his love in this utter way, and there's an objectivity there for sure, but then I can, at the limit, say, I still don't care. I'd rather live inside. I'd rather live on my own terms. I'd rather not have any of that. So sure, and there's the ground, if you want, of the Christian doctrine of hell, that it's still possible to reject even that acrobatic manifestation of the divine love. I can still say, I don't want it. So that's what that would mean, so sure, that's still a possibility.
Well, what I wanted to ask is, what are the conditions upon which a person can accept this gift? I mean, suppose somebody's commits some terrible sins in their lives and they've wronged lots of people.
Oh, you just say you're sorry. It doesn't matter if you are like me and you're trying to be a good person every day. That's not good enough. But if you kill people and have sinned all your life, all you have to do is say, sorry, and then you get to go to heaven. Oh, makes perfect sense.
Is it enough to genuinely repent to God in the privacy of your own mind? Must you go on a campaign of trying to right the wrongs that you've done where you can? I mean, if you thieve from somebody and you, nearing the end of your life, perhaps you pray towards God and you beg for his forgiveness and you accept the sacrifice of Jesus, is that sufficient, or do you have to seek out the person that you thieved from and give them their money back first?
You should. I mean, so that's a part of confession. If someone comes to me and confesses, I want to know if that person is contrite. So are they sincere in their confession?
I really am sorry. I didn't mean to arpe all those young girls and murder all those people. Please let me into your pearly gates.
And are they willing to make amends or reparation? Sure, that's something I'd strongly encourage them to do. But
you're a man, so you can't read minds, right? So they could lie, right? But then you have the power to tell them to say 10 Hail Marys and all is good.
The divine offer of grace is not dependent upon that. Like, until you do the last thing, you don't get any grace. Rather, it's a response to grace. It's having been graced with God's forgiveness, of course, then I want to do all I can to make up for what I've done. It's like someone in AA doing a searching moral inventory, and having done that work, now let me do whatever I can to make reparation. But the heart of it, though, is the manifestation of grace. It's
Speaking of grace, this is why Christians have such a bad reputation with just regular atheists. You know, I get why you wouldn't like somebody who's, you know, shouting from the rooftops that you're a bad, that you're stupid for believing and whatever. But this, you've heard me say many times that from the bottom of my heart, I not only grew up with God, but that I spent years searching, reading, and talking to people. And then you say you don't know if you don't know the Word of God. So you're just not listening. You're just here to say things and hope that somebody's dumb enough to not question you. That is the reputation you give all Christians when you do this. I don't give a shit, but any Christians out there, this is what we think of all of you. Not all of you, but you know what I mean. And we don't know you, and we know that you're Christian, and that's all we know.
Merited grace. You have to think, Alex, is behind a lot of the doctrinal language, let's say around the cross. Read like a high doctrinal articulation like Anselm's, you know, Cur Deus Homo. But see, go behind that to a metaphor, and behind the metaphor to an experience. The metaphor is something like, I've been ransomed. You know, so in the ancient world, people were kidnapped all the time and held for ransom. And there they were in some distant country in a hopeless situation. And I'll never get home. And then suddenly this person paid off my ransom. I was released, you know. Now go behind that to the experience. Their experience of Jesus crucified and risen from the dead. It's like I've been released. It's like I've been delivered. Well, from what? From the
Good
fear,
question.
from Peterson's articulation. I've been liberated from everything that I'm terrified of, because now I know that God's love is more powerful. So it's like being redeemed. Now take the next step. I start articulating that in a high doctrinal way. Okay, so if I was redeemed, that means I was held captive by someone. And if I was redeemed, I was bought back. Well, who paid the price and who got the, well, sure, now you can work into Anselm's thing, but I'd go behind.
What? You're just blathering on, bro.
Behind that to the more primordial experience of it. They experience the risen Jesus as a liberation. Salvation just means healing. I've been healed. I've been healed of every wound I've ever had. By his wounds, I've been healed, all of that. I've been straightened out. St. Paul, I've been justified, right? It's another metaphor. I've been straightened out. I was all crooked and mixed up. Now I'm straightened out. So they reach for this array of metaphors, which then later get into high doctrinal disputes. Now go to Luther in the 16th century fighting with Catholics over what does justification mean.
What are you
But I'm
talking
more interested
about,
now
bro?
in you and say, well, the first Christians, they reach for these, some forensic, some medical, some economic metaphors to express what it was like to see the risen Christ. I think that's where it all comes from.
Jeffrey Dahmer famously, near the end of his life, became a Christian,
Yeah.
at least ostensibly, studied the gospel, saw a priest, and just very shortly after was murdered by a fellow inmate.
Right.
What do you make of the objection to Christianity that as long as he was sincere in his repentance, a man like Jeffrey Dahmer can end up in heaven, but a person who lives their lives not harming a soul, who doesn't find Jesus near the end of their life and dies an atheist, might end up in hell?
Well, first, as a
I would love to hear what you guys have to say on this one. The poll, is Jeffrey Dahmer in heaven? You just heard his story. He was, I mean, obviously you know his story. He's a prolific serial killer, but converted, was very serious about his religion, and was murdered in prison. Is he in heaven?
As a Catholic, I contest that second side of the dilemma, because we wouldn't put it that way. I mean, we would say that even an atheist who's sincerely following his or her conscience can be saved. So that's teaching of Vatican II. So we wouldn't.
Some people believe that. Other people don't.
Hold to that. And someone like Dahmer, you know, that's a case like, he's a very extreme case, obviously, but that's been posed over the centuries. Let's say I don't know what's going on inside of Jeffrey Dahmer's soul, but if with complete sincerity and real repentance, he opened his heart to the forgiveness of God, he received the forgiveness of God.
Do you see how morally corrupt you people are? That is disgusting. This man R-paid and killed people. That is that is crazy. I'm going to hell, but Jeffrey Dahmer. At least we got 60% here saying no on the poll, but between Seabass and Bishop here, Like says there's a Who album called Tommy that is about a kid that is deaf, blind, and dumb. That is about this. It's a great album. All right, I have to check that out.
Now, let's say Dahmer lived another 30 years, and I were a spiritual director or confessor. I would urge him in every possible way to make reparation, for what he had done. I always think of that scene in The Mission. Remember Robert De Niro, who was this, terrible slave trader and all this. And finally he comes to an experience of forgiveness. But he himself demanded that he bear this terrible load all through the jungle and up and down mountains. And even his friends were saying, come on, you've done enough. And no, I've not done enough. And only when he knew that he had done enough was he able to let it down.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta. So this is what we're gonna start the panel off with. I want you guys to think of this question. I'm posing this to anybody who is going to be in the panel. This is going to be where we start the discussion. I want answers to this question. If Jeffrey Dahmer is in heaven, why should I care about any of this when I could just convert before I die? Harley said, I don't know. None of us can say what God does and doesn't do. The decision is up to God. That's a cop-out. Come on. Obviously, I'm asking, what do you think?
It's a good spiritual instinct. It's also reflected in the doctrine of purgatory, right? That even after we die, is there some work that needs to be done? Yeah, 99% of us, I would say. So I guess I would deny I deny one side of that dilemma. I don't think the atheist ipso facto automatically goes to hell. No.
I find it.
Yeah, and his daughters were, apple don't fall from the tree, right? But yeah, I don't know anything about the Bible.
It sounds strange to say, but I find it quite.
I bet you and me are the only ones who even understood what I just said.
Quite reassuring to think of a man like Jeffrey Dahmer in heaven. I think it demonstrates the radical compassion of the figure of Jesus, because if Jeffrey Dahmer can receive grace and end up in heaven, then what does that say about the rest of us? It gives me a sense of calm that no matter what I do wrong, as a Christian, if I were a Christian, I could think like.
Notice how the people who base their ideology and how they live their lives on logic both came to the same obvious conclusion.
That if that compassion really is on offer to everybody, then it has to be on offer to someone like him. And I think it reassures, but you can understand why it might be seen as a problem. I mean, for example, if someone were to wrong me, somebody were to thieve from me or mistreat me, and then they petition for God's forgiveness and God forgives them, I might say, well, look, that's not God's right. That's mine. If somebody wrongs me, then the person to whom they should be turning for forgiveness is me. And if I don't grant it, they don't get it. Why is it that God essentially seems to be able to grant forgiveness on the behalf of other people?
Well, first of all, he should do that vis-a-vis you. And if I were a spiritual director, I'd tell him to do that. But I'd say this with C.S. Lewis, your countryman, that God is the one who's offended in every sin. So God has a right to forgive anybody, because someone sins against you, but they're also sinning against God by that very same move. So it's always God's prerogative to forgive. Only God can forgive sins, say the people around Jesus in the New Testament, and that's dead right. Only God can forgive sins, because he's the one
Isn't that
offended in every sin.
convenient?
But I would encourage that person, hypothetically, to seek your forgiveness too.
Of course, it seems troubling that a person who commits these wrongs can get to heaven. There's a caricature of this position of imagining the person who lives their life doing essentially whatever their animal instincts drive them to do, and then at the end of their life says, well, sorry, God, and then enters into heaven. I remember there was an episode of Family Guy where they bust into the compound and they find Osama bin Laden, and he says, I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and then yes, he's in heaven. Of course, this is ridiculous, but it summarizes, I think, the idea that even if a person is genuinely sorry, it's not quite on the order of just being like, sorry, whoops, they have to actually believe it in their heart, but it seems like they haven't done enough to overcome
facts
what they've done in their life. And
hence purgatory on our reading. That's why purgatory to me is not at all a trivial doctrine. It's one that honors.
But isn't purgatory only a Catholic thing? Isn't that something only Catholics believe in?
Just what you're talking about. That's why, like life after death too is a way of honoring the passion for justice. Because let's face it, in this life, occasionally justice breaks out, but I mean, typically it doesn't. Some of the worst people succeed. Some of the best people suffer. And so,
there you have the epitome of cope. The world is not fair, buddy boy. And so because the world is not fair, I'm going to invent this cosmic justice that I've never seen or have any evidence of, but it makes me feel better. It makes me feel better that, well, at least they're getting what they deserve in the afterlife. At least. There's no justice here, but at least they're getting what they deserve. That is cope. You are coping with uncomfortable truths. Yes, justice does not show itself as often as it should. That's just life, homie. That's just what it is. I'm sorry that you need to invent things to deal with reality. That doesn't change reality.
And we all die like animals and go on the ground. That's it. Well, then there is no justice. There is no justice at all. And then why not just live the way, any materialist would tell me to live? Belief in life or death is
like any materialist would tell you to live. How many materialists are out here doing the type of things that you wouldn't want being done, that are separate from the things that you wouldn't want Christians to do, that Christians are doing? Sure, materialists are out here having premarital sex and doing all this stuff. But what are we doing that Christians are not? That's wrong. I mean, exactly, Divine Ron. This bishop constantly referencing everything but himself. Are his beliefs so weak he can't articulate them himself? Yes. This is a bishop. This is the kind of thing I want you guys to understand, is that whatever value hierarchy that you guys have in your mind, the people above you have a very different idea of the world, of the universe, of religion, of God. So it's fine that you have that idea of the universe, but understand that only exists in your mind. That's it. Harley said, in my belief, Jeffrey Dahmer hasn't been judged yet. He has to wait for every creature and being involved in his life to come forward as witness. After that, he will be given judgment. Okay. Seabass says, right, that's a good one. Good one.
Correlated to a great passion for justice, that there's some order of being in which God will set things right. And purgatory then is ingredient in that idea too, that right, if it's just like Osama bin Laden in The Family Guy, well then that guy's no more ready for heaven than, the man on the moon. So what he would require, in fact, is all kinds of purgation of his, attachments, et cetera, et cetera. It's the good thief is a much better example, right? So someone who's presumably led a pretty bad life, and he ends up nailed to a Roman cross because he's a common thief.
Aladdin.
But certainly in the gospel reading summons
all criminals
the spiritual
are Aladdin.
integrity, to reach out to Jesus and in great sincerity of heart. And to him is said, today you'll be with me in paradise. So, I mean, I get that. I get that. The Osama bin Laden would be the guy that needs an awful lot of purgatory.
Yeah, I mean, purgatory is something that I don't know very much about. And I don't know what the Catholic Church's official stance is on purgatory at the moment.
If someone dies,
does it have one?
Yeah, if someone dies in the good grace of God, meaning someone dies, in a state of grace, but yet in need of purgation, which means about 99% of us. There's a state of reality in which after death, one is purged of one's attachments and sins and so on. So it's a
I like that
being
one,
readied for heaven. So you think of it this way: Mother Teresa taking care of the sick and dying in Calcutta is essentially in heaven, because heaven means a place of radical love. Suppose somebody who's just lived a complete hedonistic life is...
You can't make this shit up. You can't make this shit up. Yeah, that's nonsense. But all the stuff that you've been talking about, you're dead on, bro.
Sent to Calcutta to live with Mother Teresa's sisters and do their work. He'd be in hell. I mean, he'd find that utterly, unbearably awful, right? He would require enormous amount of purgation to ready himself to live the life which in fact is a heavenly life, but he's in no way ready for it. So something like that, I think, is essential to the doctrine of purgatory.
Christopher Hitchens once described purgatory as a disposal problem. I think he saw it as this idea of having an intuition that there are people who die. In particular, I think unborn fetuses are referenced here. If somebody has an abortion, on the Catholic view, of course, life begins at conception. So you have a human being who hasn't had the opportunity to commit sins, but also hasn't had the opportunity to accept the gift of Jesus, that they end up in this place called purgatory. And so he characterized it as a place that's invented to solve this problem. Is there a scriptural, a biblical basis for purgatory? Do you think that there's a good general philosophical grounds for this idea of purgatory? Or do you think it is something that you essentially have to believe, because otherwise you run into a problem of what happens to such people?
Well, no, but that last point you made is in a way the philosophical ground. As we reflect on the dynamics at play here, people say, well, yeah, it would make sense there'd be such a state. Otherwise, God's justice is not going to obtain. But what you're describing there, if it's Hitchens' view, is not so much purgatory as limbo. And limbo, the church has held at certain points in history. Most recently, it kind of suspended that and said, no, we entrust, let's say, a aborted child or an infant child to the mercy of God, and we leave it at that. So that's closer to limbo than purgatory. Because purgatory is not.
I think it might have been limbo he was talking about in the quote that I'm thinking of in the Catholic Church debate.
Right.
I might have mixed that up with purgatory there.
Because purgatory is a transient state, not a permanent state. It's meant to be a time of preparation. Read the Divine Comedy of Dante. Of course, is so perceptive about everything. But a lot of the central part of that book, the Purgatorio, is the purging away of the 7 deadly sins, hence the 7-story mountain of purgatory. And on each one, Dante has them engaging in what Jung called the Antiadromia. They have to do the opposite of what they did in life. So the prideful, who are always lifting themselves up, were pressed down by great rocks. The envious, who looked out at the world all the time, who's better than I am and who's getting more attention, they have their eyelids sewn shut. And so in his poetic imagination, it's the way of saying you have to just agere contra, as Ignatius said. You have to act against whatever your tendency is. So something like that, I think.
Yeah, I apologize, guys. I mean, when I was watching it at 2x speed, editing the video that I dropped before, it seemed a little bit more entertaining. I mean, I'm glad it sparked a lot of this stuff, because when we go over to Discord, I absolutely do want to have these conversations. But let's yeah, exactly. he's mentioned Jung a bunch of times and just right over his head. But let's just finish this up. We got a few minutes, about 8 minutes left of this, and then we are going to head right over to the Discord panel. And Mike, I'm very excited to hear what you got to say. And everybody else, if you're not already in there, that's the place to be. That's the place to be.
Reasonably obtains as a preparation for the fullness of love that heaven is.
So why not, if nearing the end of your life, you can apologize, and as long as you do so sincerely, find your way at least to purgatory and potentially to heaven, why not console yourself or consign yourself to a life of hedonism and base pleasure, and just wait until your deathbed to really contemplate these ideas? Wouldn't it be rational for a person to put that off for as long as they can?
No, that's childish, because in fact, the life you're describing is
why is that childish?
Terrible life, and is a painful life, and a life that leaves you both physically, emotionally, and spiritually in a destitute condition. And
okay, but if you believe that we have eternal paradise waiting for us, then hedonism inherently means after immediate pleasure. So it may be emotionally and spiritually destitute, but you're experiencing pleasure, and then you get to go to heaven. What is childish about that?
So say, I'm going to do all that, and then the last minute is just counterproductive. No, if you want to start right.
How is that counterproductive? The idea is to do the most pleasurable things. So you do all the pleasurable things while you're here, then you repent, and you go to heaven. This is everything. Oh, well, no.
Right now, living a life that's joyful and spiritually alert and all that. So no, that would be silly.
That would be silly. That's his argument. That would be silly to live in a way that you are in constant pleasure and also still get to go to heaven. That would be silly.
I have one more question for you, which is, what do you think young people in particular get wrong about religion and belief in God?
They imagine God as a competitive being. The roots of that philosophically are very interesting, and they're deep. To imagine God as a being, I think it was Hitchens who said, religious people believe that the world is like a cosmic North Korea. There's this terrible tyrant who's surveying things all the time and judging. And God is not a being in Thomas Aquinas.
How do you know?
God is ipsum esse. He's the sheer active to be. He's sheer actuality.
How do you know?
And he's not competing, therefore, on the same ontological plane with creatures.
How do you know?
It's not the case that as God gets all the glory, I get no glory. As God gets all the attention, I have to be denigrated. On the contrary, it's what St. Irenaeus said. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. What God wants is for me to be alive, spiritually alive in every way, That's the image of the burning bush, right? That's on fire but not consumed. That's what God wants vis-a-vis his creation. And I think young people get wrong. They do the Hitchens thing. That God is a terrible tyrant that's surveying and ready to pounce and to judge.
Okay, do you have a rebuttal, or are you just saying that people do it?
No, God is the source of all value, and is the source of life, the living God.
Hey, we got Wesley in the building. What is good? What is good? We got both you and Seabass on the same stream. I didn't know if it was ever gonna happen. Welcome.
Wants me to be like him, to be alive as he's alive. That's the mistake that a lot of people, especially young people, make. Watch George Carlin sometime. You know, I liked him in many ways, but George Carlin coming out of this Catholic training of his era, but this horrible
George Carlin was a super atheist.
view of God as this desperately punishing tyrant. You know, that's not the great tradition at all around God. So maybe
you understand why people. You might understand why Christopher Hitchens describes God as a tyrant, because of course, you know, God is the great ground of all being. But there's this idea that if you don't accept this, or if you put a foot wrong, or if you do the wrong thing, you get punished, and in such a way that even if you do it inside your own head, you have this force that can punish you for it. Doesn't that seem tyrannical to you?
Yeah, that does, but that's not the right way to look at it, because see,
he's got the right way to look at it, guys. All you guys who are saying that he's wrong, you guys are wrong. He's the bishop. He's the bishop. So why should I be listening to anybody in YouTube comments over an actual bishop? Maybe you guys are wrong and he's right. Maybe you guys are wrong and he's right.
See, here's something very important philosophically, that God doesn't need us. God needs nothing. God is God. The world adds nothing to God's greatness. It's a very important theological idea. God doesn't need my moral perfection. God doesn't need anything from me. God needs nothing from me. How do you know that? So God's offended by what No, that's a psychologized sort of symbol of what we're talking about. God, the anger of God in the Bible, I would translate as God's passion to set things right. God hates the fact that I'm not alive, and he hates what I've done to myself, and he wants that over. He wants to burn that away. And so the divine anger, the divine punishment.
Why couldn't he just burn it away? Why does he need you to do anything? He's God.
If we psychologize it as some, Kim Jong-un punishing his rivals, that's not it at all. It's
how is that not the case? You've just said it's not the case. How? Explain your claim.
God desiring, in fact, going all the way into our dysfunction, all the way down, so he might draw us out of it. That's the divine anger. That's why, people say on the cross, we're judged. Well, yeah, sin is judged on the cross. Sin is judged. God went all the way into sin so as to remake it, transform it. So that's the problem. Now, look, I'll grant to you, there have been a lot of lousy teachers of Christianity over the centuries. Think of James Joyce's teachers in Ireland. I mean, they're terrible. And they took this genius kid. They gave him some beautiful scholastic philosophy, and he took that all his life. But they also gave him this sort of poisonous understanding of God. Or Christopher Hitchens.
All right, guys. I think that I don't think we're gonna get anything more out of this guy. But I'm very, like I said, I'm very excited to hear from you guys. So, like I said, we didn't learn a lot. This is just every single time I have a conversation or listen to a conversation with a Christian person, it ends up exactly like this. So you guys say that you have information that can change that. So let's do it. Let's head over to Discord. Like I said, the link is in the description. If somebody wants to drop the link in the chat as well, that is where we are headed. It's free to join. We're going to be in the video chat. We'll be able to share videos. We don't have to worry about YouTube censorship, any of that. Please come and check it out. You guys know I'm live every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern. And I've been dropping shorter videos, like 10 to 15-minute videos every single day. Every single day. So even if you hit the notification bell and you don't get a notification, just check my channel. There's always going to be something there for you. There's going to be something on the community tab, a new video, a new stream. There is always something every single day. Check this shit out and tell your friends. Tell your friends. We're in a little bit of a slow streak, and we haven't been getting any new subscribers. It's a slow time of the year. But if you tell people, if you just share the videos, take the URL. All right, there's a button that says share. Just do that and plaster out everywhere. Things like that, commenting on the videos, liking the videos, commenting on the videos, sharing the videos, all that kind of stuff really, really, really does help. Oh my goodness. Dessert for Marty. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. There you go. Thank you, thank you, thank you very, very much. And yeah, do what Nick does. Always like the video right away. Thank you so much for partying with me, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I know we didn't get too much done, but I think it's important for us to take a look at these kinds of conversations and break them down and talk about why, if they don't go anywhere, why they didn't go anywhere. So then next time when we do have those types of conversations, then we can do something about it. We can actually change people's minds. We can change the way people think. We can do something, because Bishop here didn't do much. So that said, again, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the party. I've been your host, Lutch, aka the Indian Jesus, here to resurrect the second coming of common sense. Until next time, guys, I am out of here. Peace.